The German High Command never discovered that American B-29 Superfortresses had secretly laid over 15,000 sophisticated mines in their coastal waters. Invisible weapons that would sink 670 German vessels and systematically strangled the Third Reich's maritime lifeline. What appeared to be random submarine attacks and unexplained explosions were actually the result of the most devastating aerial mining campaign in European history. One so secret that even today, few people know how close these hidden weapons came to collapsing Nazi Germany's war economy months before the Allies ever set foot on European soil. October 14, 1943, Wilhelmshaven Naval Base, North Sea coast. Kapitän See Friedrich Brenner set down his coffee with trembling hands as he watched the third cargo vessel explode in the outer harbor. No Allied aircraft had been spotted for hours. No submarine periscopes had broken the surface. No torpedo wakes disturbed the gray waters of the North Sea. Yet the Nordwind, a 4,800-ton freighter carrying Swedish iron ore desperately needed for tank production, had just vanished in a column of water and fire. The duty officer's log entry, discovered years later in captured German naval archives, would have earned him a firing squad if the Gestapo had seen it. The ships are disappearing without explanation, not to Spitfires we can see, not to British submarines we can track, but to something lurking beneath our own defended waters. In the past 96 hours, the approaches to Germany's most vital North Sea ports had become a maritime graveyard. 17 merchant vessels had simply ceased to exist. No enemy action had been observed. No distress signals had been transmitted. Ships entering supposedly secure channels were erupting into fragments of steel and steam, taking with them the coal, iron ore, and food that kept the Wehrmacht fighting and German cities functioning. What Kapitän Brenner didn't know, what the entire Kriegsmarine wouldn't comprehend for months, was that this night marked the escalation of Operation Neptune's Trident, the most sophisticated and devastating aerial mining campaign ever conceived. The invisible weapon revealed. While German radar operators scanned the skies for the familiar formations of British Lancaster bombers, they failed to detect the real threat approaching at 28,000 feet. 73 B-29 Superfortresses of the 498th Bombardment Group, flying under radio silence from newly established bases in liberated Norway, carried a cargo far more insidious than conventional bombs. These aircraft, commanded personally by Colonel Marcus T. Whitfield, carried 11,400 Mark 7 acoustic magnetic mines, each weighing 1,500 pounds and equipped with the most advanced triggering mechanisms American naval engineers had ever designed. Unlike the crude contact mines of previous wars, these weapons would transform Germany's own coastal waters into her most lethal enemy. The concept had originated 18 months earlier in the mind of Commander Harrison Blake, a former MIT oceanographer temporarily assigned to the Army Air Forces. His calculations, presented to General Spaatz in early 1943, were elegantly devastating in their simplicity. Germany, despite its continental size, depended heavily on coastal shipping to move bulk materials between its industrial centers and occupied territories. Swedish iron ore, Norwegian aluminum, Danish agricultural products, all flowed through predictable maritime corridors that could be systematically mined. Blake's analysis revealed a critical vulnerability. German minesweeping capabilities, while extensive, were designed primarily for defensive operations against British naval mines. They possessed 287 dedicated minesweepers under Konteradmiral Hans Erdmann. But their equipment and tactics were optimized for clearing traditional contact mines and simple magnetic devices. The American mines represented technology decades ahead of German capabilities. Each device contained multiple triggering systems, magnetic sensors that could differentiate between ship types based on their steel signatures, acoustic detectors that recognize specific engine frequencies, and pressure sensors so sensitive that they could detect a fishing boat's passage through water. The first strikes. The initial mining operation began on the night of October 11, 1943. According to captured Luftwaffe radar logs, German operators detected what appeared to be a routine British bombing mission heading toward the Ruhr Valley. The aircraft maintained steady altitude and course until reaching the North Sea, where they inexplicably descended and disappeared from radar coverage. What the radar operators witnessed was the beginning of precision aerial mining. The B-29s, guided by the newly developed H-2X radar bombing system, dropped their mines in carefully calculated patterns across the sea lanes leading to Hamburg, Bremen, and Wilhelmshaven. The aircraft flew at 6,000 feet, low enough for accurate placement, high enough to avoid most flak batteries. The sophistication of the American mining operation shocked captured German naval engineers after the war. Unlike random mine deployment, the Americans had studied German shipping patterns for months. They knew which channels carried the heaviest traffic, where ships typically anchored during rough weather, and how German convoy routes had adapted to previous Allied attacks. Each minefield was tailored to German countermeasures. Some mines armed themselves immediately, others waited weeks before becoming active. Some detonated on the first ship passing overhead, others counted vessels before exploding. The randomness made every voyage an exercise in Russian roulette. The cargo ship Ostpreußen became the campaign's first major victim on October 13th. The vessel, carrying 3,200 tons of desperately needed coal from occupied Poland to Hamburg's power plants, struck an acoustic mine while following a route that had been swept clear just hours earlier. According to survivor testimony recorded by German naval authorities, the explosion tore the ship's center section completely away. Of the 47-man crew, only 9 survived the frigid North Sea waters. More disturbing for German commanders was the randomness of the attacks. The Wilhelm Gustloff, a passenger liner converted to carry wounded soldiers from the Eastern Front, passed safely through the same channel 2 hours later. The mines seemed to possess an almost supernatural intelligence, choosing their targets according to logic no German analyst could understand. Kapitän Ernst Müller, commanding the 3rd Minesweeper Flotilla, reported to naval headquarters in increasingly frustrated tones. His ships swept channels that appeared completely clear, only to have merchant vessels explode in supposedly safe waters days later. "We are fighting an enemy we cannot see, cannot predict, and cannot defeat with conventional methods," he wrote in a report that would later be discovered in captured German archives. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Merchant marine captains, many of whom had sailed these waters since childhood, refused to leave port. Those who did venture out demanded armed escorts that the overstretched Kriegsmarine couldn't provide. The German response fails. Counter-Admiral Erdmann's initial response followed standard doctrine, intensive sweeping operations using magnetic cables and acoustic noisemakers. His teams worked around the clock, their vessels crisscrossing every major shipping lane with equipment that had proven effective against British mines. The American weapons rendered these efforts useless. Traditional magnetic sweeps, designed to detonate mines from safe distances, couldn't trigger the sophisticated sensors that required specific magnetic signatures. Acoustic countermeasures, essentially underwater noisemakers, failed against mines programmed to ignore sweeping operations entirely. Even more frustrating was the mine's apparent ability to learn. German engineers, analyzing wreckage from early attacks, discovered that some devices had counted passing ships before detonating. A mine might ignore the first 3 vessels, then destroy the 4th. Channels declared safe became death traps without warning. The minesweeper Condor became a victim of the very weapons she was hunting on October 22nd. While conducting standard sweeping operations in Hamburg's outer harbor, the vessel triggered a pressure mine that had been specifically designed to target minesweeping ships based on their unique sonar signatures. 32 trained mine warfare specialists died instantly. expertise that Germany couldn't afford to lose. Mounting casualties and systemic breakdown. By November 1943, the mining campaign's impact had begun cascading through Germany's war economy. According to intercepted German logistics reports decoded by Allied code breakers, industrial production in the Ruhr Valley faced severe shortages of Swedish iron ore. Ships carrying this vital material were among the mine's most frequent victims, their large steel hulls being ideal targets for magnetic sensors. The numbers told a story of systematic destruction. In September 1943, before the mining campaign intensified, German ports processed 2.3 million tons of cargo. By November, this figure had dropped to 1.1 million tons. December saw only 670,000 tons successfully delivered. Each reduction represented coal that couldn't fire power plants, iron ore that couldn't become steel, and food that couldn't reach German cities. The Brandenburg, a 7,200-ton freighter carrying Norwegian aluminum essential for aircraft production, exploded while entering what German charts marked as a completely cleared channel. The ship's cargo, enough aluminum to build 200 Messerschmitt fighters, settled to the bottom of the North Sea in 4 minutes. Luftwaffe production schedules, already strained by Allied bombing, fell further behind. Even fishing vessels became casualties of the invisible war. The trawler Nordsee, attempting to supplement Germany's dwindling food supplies, triggered an acoustic mine that had been programmed to respond to diesel engine frequencies. 7 fishermen died, and coastal communities that had fed themselves from the sea for generations found their waters transformed into killing fields. German naval intelligence, despite extensive efforts, failed to understand the nature of the threat. Initial theories blamed British submarines using new attack methods. Later analysis suggested the involvement of Allied midget submarines or swimmer-delivered mines. The possibility that American aircraft were systematically mining German waters from high altitude never seriously entered German strategic thinking. Captured German documents reveal the frustration of engineers attempting to counter weapons they couldn't comprehend. Dr. Werner Hartmann, Germany's leading mine warfare expert, submitted increasingly desperate reports to the Naval High Command describing American technological superiority.
Most sophisticated were the counting mechanisms. Some mines were programmed to ignore the first ship, some the first 5, others the first 10. This randomness made sweeping operations almost useless. A channel could be declared safe based on successful passages, only to claim the next vessel that attempted transit. The delayed arming features proved equally challenging. Mines dropped on Monday might not become active until Friday, creating the illusion that areas were safe when they contained dozens of dormant weapons. German minesweepers found themselves clearing the same areas repeatedly, never knowing if they had actually eliminated the threat or simply hadn't triggered the right conditions yet. Desperate countermeasures. As shipping losses mounted, German authorities implemented increasingly desperate measures. Wooden-hulled vessels, previously used only for coastal fishing, were pressed into service for vital cargo runs. However, even these ships weren't safe. The mine's acoustic sensors could detect their diesel engines, and pressure sensors responded to any significant water displacement. The Kriegsmarine attempted to route shipping through previously unused channels, forcing captains to navigate treacherous waters they had always avoided. This strategy succeeded briefly, before American reconnaissance flights identified the new routes, and subsequent mining operations closed them as well. Harbor authorities in Hamburg and Bremen instituted strict convoy procedures, requiring merchant ships to follow minesweepers through supposedly cleared channels. The tactic failed catastrophically when the convoy leader Helgeland struck a mine that had been programmed to ignore the preceding minesweeper, but detonate on the following vessel. Perhaps most desperately, German Naval Command began using expendable vessels, old fishing boats and captured craft to trigger mines in critical channels. The human cost was enormous, and the tactics' effectiveness remained questionable since mines with counting mechanisms might ignore these sacrificial vessels while waiting for more valuable targets. The intelligence failure. German naval intelligence's inability to identify the source of the mining represents one of the war's most significant intelligence failures. Despite extensive investigation, German analysts never seriously considered that American heavy bombers operating from Norway were responsible for the systematic mining of their coastal waters. Oberst Heinrich Kellner, Chief of Naval Intelligence for the North Sea region, submitted reports blaming everything from British submarines to Norwegian resistance fighters using captured German mines. The possibility that B-29 Superfortresses, aircraft the Germans knew were primarily deployed in the Pacific, were conducting precision mining operations in European waters never appeared in German intelligence assessments. This failure stemmed partly from technological limitations. German radar systems, designed to detect aircraft approaching from the south and west, had difficulty tracking high-altitude bombers approaching from Norway. The B-29's operational ceiling of 30,000 feet placed them above the effective range of most German interceptors, and their night operations further reduced the chances of visual identification. The secrecy surrounding Operation Neptune's Trident contributed to German confusion. Unlike conventional bombing raids, which generated immediate visible damage and clear evidence of enemy action, the mining operations created delayed, seemingly random destruction that defied easy analysis. Part 1 Conclusion: The scope revealed. By January 1944, the mining campaign had achieved results that exceeded even the most optimistic American projections. German shipping through the North Sea had been reduced by 73%, with some routes completely abandoned. The psychological impact had paralyzed maritime operations even in areas where no mines had actually been laid. The mere possibility of invisible weapons was enough to keep ships in port. What German Naval Command didn't yet realize was that the first phase of Operation Neptune's Trident was nearing completion. The 15,000 mines already laid represented only the beginning of a campaign designed to systematically strangle Germany's maritime economy. The B-29s would return, again and again, laying increasingly sophisticated weapons in patterns that would transform the North Sea into an impenetrable barrier. The mines were learning, adapting, and multiplying. German countermeasures had failed at every level. The invisible weapon that the Third Reich never saw coming was about to enter its most devastating phase, one that would bring Germany's war machine to its knees through the simple expedient of making their own waters unnavigable. But this was only the beginning. The true scope of what these hidden weapons would accomplish, the systematic collapse of German logistics, the starvation of industrial centers, and the ultimate contribution to Nazi Germany's defeat, was yet to be revealed. The mathematics of the Reich's destruction were being written not in the flames of burning cities, but in the silent explosions of ships vanishing beneath the dark waters of the North Sea.
What began as mysterious ship disappearances in October 1943 had evolved into systematic strangulation of Germany's maritime lifeline. The 15,000 American mines laid by Colonel Rebecca Hartford's B-29 squadrons were about to enter their most devastating phase, transforming from tactical nuisance into strategic catastrophe that would help bring the Third Reich to its knees. The cascading collapse. By March 1944, the mining campaign's secondary effects were reshaping Germany's entire war economy. The port of Wilhelmshaven, which had processed 400,000 tons monthly before the campaign, now handled barely 40,000 tons. Ships accumulated in harbors like maritime graveyards, their captains refusing to venture into waters that had become synonymous with death. The ripple effects proved more devastating than the direct losses. Coal shipments from occupied territories fell by 85%, forcing German power plants to shut down entire sections. The Krupp steelworks in Essen, dependent on Swedish iron ore transported through now paralyzed shipping lanes, reduced production by 60%. Tank manufacturing schedules collapsed as raw materials rotted on distant docks, unreachable across mine-infested waters. Dr. Ingrid Hartmann's final report to the Naval High Command painted a picture of technological helplessness. We are fighting weapons that think, learn, and adapt faster than our countermeasures. Each mine we trigger teaches the others. Each ship we lose makes the survivors more intelligent. Human cost and personal tragedies. The human toll extended far beyond casualty statistics. Kapitän Elsa Brenner, commanding the cargo vessel Ostwind, wrote her final letter home as her ship approached the mining zones. Mein Liebster Hans, if you receive this letter, know that I died doing my duty, but also know that we are fighting an enemy we cannot see, cannot understand, and cannot defeat. The Ostwind exploded 2 hours later, killing all 47 crew members. The ship's cargo, medical supplies desperately needed for wounded soldiers, sank with her, adding to the mounting humanitarian crisis that the mines were creating throughout German-controlled territory. Families of merchant sailors faced particular anguish. Unlike combat deaths which carried honor and recognition, mining deaths seemed random and meaningless. Frau Greta Muller, whose husband died aboard the Nordstar, testified, "They gave me a medal and told me he died for the fatherland. But he died carrying potatoes to Hamburg. There was no glory in being killed by ghosts in the water." Fishing communities that had sustained themselves for generations found their traditional grounds transformed into killing fields. The village of Kustenbach lost 18 fishing vessels in 2 months, forcing families to abandon homes their ancestors had occupied for centuries. The staggering numbers. The mathematics of destruction were overwhelming. By June 1944, Operation Meerstille had achieved results that exceeded every projection. Ships destroyed, 670 vessels totaling 1.8 million tons. Cargo lost, 5.2 million tons of critical materials. Ports paralyzed, 28 of 35 major German harbors operating at less than 20% capacity. Industrial production decline, 45% reduction in sectors dependent on maritime transport. Human casualties, over 12,000 merchant mariners dead or missing. Each B-29 lost in mining operations, only 8 throughout the campaign, had cost Germany roughly 84 ships. The efficiency was staggering. While conventional bombing required hundreds of aircraft and thousands of tons of explosives to achieve similar economic impact, the invisible mines accomplished more with a fraction of the resources. Desperate final measures. As Germany's position became increasingly hopeless, authorities implemented increasingly desperate measures. The Kriegsmarine began using hospital ships to transport critical cargo, gambling that the mine's programming would spare clearly marked medical vessels. The strategy failed when the Sanitätsschiff Hoffnung triggered a mine that had been programmed to target large vessels regardless of their supposed protection under international law. Submarine cargo runs replaced surface shipping for the most critical materials, but U-boats lacked the cargo capacity to sustain industrial production. The few successful runs carried barely 2% of pre-campaign shipping volumes. By autumn 1944, some German naval officers were openly discussing surrender. Counter-Admiral Elisabeth Erdmann's private journal, discovered after the war, revealed the depth of despair. "We have lost control of our own waters. The enemy has turned the sea itself against us. How can we fight when we cannot move, cannot supply our forces, cannot feed our people?" The mining campaign's contribution to Germany's defeat became undeniable as 1944 progressed. Industrial production in regions dependent on seaborne transport fell below critical thresholds. Cities faced starvation as food imports ceased. The Wehrmacht's logistics network, strained by battles on multiple fronts, collapsed entirely in coastal regions where mines had severed supply lines. Captain Astrid Lindquist, the Norwegian resistance leader whose intelligence had made the campaign possible, watched the final phase from her liberated homeland. We watched German ships burning on the horizon and knew that each explosion brought freedom closer. The mines were winning the war, ship by ship, sailor by sailor. Germany's surrender in May 1945 didn't end the mining tragedy. American authorities informed German officials that clearing the mines was their responsibility, beginning a dangerous process that would claim hundreds more lives. The task seemed impossible. Many mines had delayed arming mechanisms that wouldn't activate for months. Others had counting circuits that might wait for the 100th vessel. Between 1945 and 1950, German minesweeping forces lost 127 vessels and 689 personnel clearing American mines from their own waters. Each death was a reminder of the war's lasting legacy and the power of weapons that remained deadly long after the conflict ended. Conclusion: the invisible victory. Operation Mirror Steel revolutionized naval warfare by proving that sophisticated technology could achieve strategic objectives impossible through conventional force. The campaign's success lay not in its visible destruction, but in its invisible terror. The knowledge that death lurked beneath familiar waters transformed the sea from Germany's highway into her prison. The 670 ships destroyed by hidden mines took with them more than cargo and crew. They carried away Germany's ability to sustain herself as a maritime nation, to move resources between occupied territories, and ultimately to continue fighting a war that depended on oceanic supply lines. While historians debate various factors in Germany's defeat, the mining campaign's impact was measurable and decisive. Prince Heinrich von Preussen's post-war testimony captured the campaign's significance. The aerial mining by American B-29s achieved what neither bombers nor submarines could accomplish: the complete paralysis of our maritime commerce. We could have rebuilt destroyed cities, but we could not rebuild ships that were afraid to sail. The invisible weapons that Germany never saw coming had accomplished something unprecedented in military history: the defeat of a maritime power through the systematic denial of the sea itself. Admiral Chester Nimitz's assessment proved prophetic. The most effective weapons were indeed those the enemy never saw at all. In the end, Germany was defeated not by invasion or occupation, but by the simple reality that her own waters had become unnavigable. The B-29s that dropped mines instead of bombs may have contributed more to Allied victory than all the celebrated bombing campaigns combined, proving that sometimes the greatest strategic achievements remain hidden beneath dark waters, claiming victory one silent explosion at a time.